Imagine walking into a courtroom, right? And you are facing a literal death sentence.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the evidence against you is just overwhelming. There's video, there are fingerprints, there's this massive paper trail of every mistake you have ever made.
Sounds terrifying, honestly.
Right. But then you look around the room and you realize something totally bizarre. The defense attorney representing you, the star witness testifying for you, the sole juror deciding your fate, and the presiding judge holding the gavel, they are all the exact same person.
Wow.
And that person has already decided that you are innocent.
It's the ultimate rigged trial. I mean, if you're the one on the stand, it completely shatters the entire psychological weight of guilt.
It really does. And well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a profound theological framework today from a study titled More Than Conquerors.
Which is such a fascinating text.
It is. And our mission today is to explore this ancient thesis that, completely reframes how we process suffering, weakness, and victory.
Because it's not what you'd expect at all.
Exactly. So whether you are deeply religious, a student of ancient history, or just a learner who is fascinated by how these ancient texts provide blueprints for handling modern adversity, we are looking at a massive paradigm shift today.
A total shift in perspective, yeah.
The core idea here is that believers in this tradition, they aren't fighting to achieve victory. They are born into a victorious mindset. Suffering isn't a punishment, it's actually the exact tool used to shape a conqueror. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we look at the first century, the original audience had very different expectations for what a victorious conqueror was supposed to look like.
Yeah, we really have to step into the historical mindset of the ancient Near East to grasp the shock value of this framework. I mean, in the first century, the Jewish people were living under the crushing weight of the Roman Empire.
Right, they were an occupied people.
Exactly. So when they read their ancient scriptures, their prophecies, they were anticipating a Messiah who would be a political, military warrior, someone who would literally ride in, crush the Roman occupiers, and establish world peace through sheer force.
They wanted the guy with the biggest sword and the biggest army.
They wanted physical dominion. And that makes perfect sense when you look at the Old Testament baseline for a conqueror. Like, the ultimate prototype was Joshua.
Oh, right. Joshua and the Battle of Jericho.
Yeah, his mandate was entirely about literal geographical warfare. He led Israel to defeat physical enemies, the Canaanites, the Midianites, the Amorites. His victory was measured by territory conquered and enemies vanquished.
So it was very tangible.
Very tangible. So when Jesus arrives, the expectation is basically Joshua 2.0.
But the reality they got was an impoverished teacher who was, publicly executed by the very empire they wanted him to overthrow. On paper, that is the ultimate defeat.
It looks like a total failure.
But this framework flips that entire script.
Yeah.
He didn't overthrow the physical oppressors. He bypassed Rome entirely to overthrow spiritual oppressors, like the devil, the world system, and the internal power of sinful human nature.
Which redefines the very nature of winning. We are no longer talking about capturing a city. We are talking about capturing the human condition.
Wow.
Yeah. And this framework proposes that the victory achieved in that cosmic spiritual war isn't just a historical event. It is literally implanted into a believer's spiritual DNA the moment they hear and accept the gospel.
The imagery used for this is incredibly vivid, too. 1 Peter chapter 1 describes it as an incorruptible seed being planted.
An incorruptible seed.
Yeah, you respond to that seed and then you encounter baptism. But it's not described as just a cleansing ritual. It's described as a watery grave.
That's intense.
It is. The past life, the old genetic code of defeat, is completely buried in that water. It drowns. And what emerges is an entirely new genetic makeup, the DNA of a conqueror.
And the permanence of that seed is the crucial mechanism here. Incorruptible literally means it cannot decay, it cannot be compromised, it alters the fundamental nature of the individual.
I look at it like genetic inheritance. You don't wake up every morning and fight a grueling battle to possess your eye color.
No, you definitely don't.
You just have it. It's baked into your biology. So if this spiritual victory is baked into the believer's DNA in the same way, they aren't fighting for victory. They are fighting from a place of victory.
That's a huge distinction.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit.
Yeah.
If I have the literal DNA of a cosmic conqueror, why am I still, getting crushed by my anxiety or struggling with my temper or facing terrible life circumstances?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah. Why does this framework still talk so much about fighting and suffering? Shouldn't it just be smooth sailing from there on out?
What's fascinating here is that this is the exact paradox we have to untangle. Possessing the DNA of a conqueror does not eradicate the existence of enemies.
Okay.
It guarantees you hold the ultimate advantage over the flesh and the world, but the conflict itself is a mandatory part of the process. I mean, you can have the genetic potential of a world-class athlete, but if you never face resistance, if you never train under heavyweights, that potential is never realized.
Oh, I see. Which brings us to the original conqueror himself. If the victory is already assured, how do we make sense of the intense, visceral suffering that Jesus experienced?
Right, because his experience was brutal.
Because the depiction of Christ in this theology is not a stoic superhero who just floats above the pain. It's incredibly raw.
It really is. Hebrews chapter 5 strips away any illusion that this was easy. It says Jesus offered up prayers with fervent cries and tears, and that he actually had to learn obedience through what he suffered.
That concept alone is wild, a divine being having to learn obedience.
It requires a genuine vulnerability. There's this brilliant pop culture metaphor in the source material to explain this dynamic. It says the Gospels were not just an episode of Undercover Boss, the Bible edition.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I love that analogy.
It's so good, right?
Because in Undercover Boss, the CEO puts on a fake mustache, works the fry cooker for a week, and acts surprised when things are hard.
But he knows he's fine.
Exactly. Everyone watching knows he's going back to his mansion on Friday. He's not really in danger. He has a cheat code.
A safety net. But the theological claim here is that there was no cheat code. The temptation to bypass the cross, to give into the survival instincts of his human flesh, was an agonizing, genuine pull.
He really felt it.
Yes, the physical, blunt force trauma of the crucifixion was felt in its entirety. If he had simply been going through the motions with, like, divine anesthesia, the victory would be completely hollow.
So how does that brutal reality fundamentally change the expectations for the everyday person reading this today?
Well, it revolutionizes human psychology regarding suffering. In the ancient world, and honestly, in much of our modern subconscious too, suffering is viewed as a direct punishment for sin.
Like karma.
Exactly, karma. You did something bad, so the universe, or God, is punishing you. The disciples actually operated on this assumption. When they saw a blind beggar in John chapter 9, their immediate question was, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
They just assumed his suffering was an indictment of his character.
Right. But if the ultimate sinless conqueror, the master, suffered and actually had to learn obedience through that agonizing process, it completely severs the link between suffering and divine wrath.
That is so freeing.
For the servant, the believer, facing hardship is no longer a sign that God is angry with you. It is a shared fellowship with the divine. It elevates human suffering from a meaningless punishment into a sacred, shared experience.
It normalizes the struggle. It takes the shame out of it. But even knowing that suffering is part of the deal, we still have to handle our own inadequacies, right?
We all have them.
We all have flaws, some of them deeply embarrassing or persistent. And here is where the framework makes a completely counterintuitive claim, which is that your struggles are actually your qualifications.
Yeah, the text says, if there is no struggle, there's nothing to conquer. That is the baseline rule of this theology.
Wow.
The presence of your specific inadequacy is the exact thing that qualifies you to step into the role of a conqueror.
We see this played out perfectly with the Apostle Paul. He writes in 2 Corinthians about having a thorn in the flesh.
A very famous passage.
Right. He describes it as a messenger of Satan sent to buffet him. And the Greek root for that word buffet doesn't mean a gentle nudge. It literally translates to being struck with fists.
It's violent.
This was a persistent, agonizing, humiliating weakness that was just beating him down.
And naturally, human curiosity has spent 2,000 years trying to diagnose exactly what that thorn was.
Oh, for sure.
Was it poor eyesight, malaria, a speech impediment?
There's actually an internet debate mentioned in our research where a Facebook commenter suggested maybe Paul had a wife.
Oh, wow.
Which, for the record, is a terrible joke, but it highlights how desperate we are to put a specific label on his pain.
Well, the ambiguity is actually the genius of the text. Because we don't know exactly what the thorn was, anyone can map their own persistent weakness onto Paul's experience.
That makes a lot of sense.
Paul begs God to remove this agonizing flaw 3 separate times. And the response he gets is staggering. God says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness."
God is not repulsed by our weaknesses. He is attracted to them. That quote completely stops you in your tracks.
It really does.
Think about how violently that clashes with modern hustle culture. Every podcast, every LinkedIn post, every self-help book tells you to hide your weaknesses, optimize your flaws out of existence, never let them see you sweat.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly. And here is an ancient text arguing the exact opposite. Your weakness isn't a liability to be hidden, it is the literal magnet for divine power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism at play here is grace acting as an infusion. Notice that the weakness is not removed. Paul still has the...
Yeah, it still hurts.
Right. God doesn't helicopter him out of the struggle. Instead, the weakness becomes the exact entry point, the port for divine strength to sustain the believer. The capacity to endure is supernaturally enhanced, precisely because the human capacity has hit its absolute limit.
So God is actively using our weaknesses. But what is he actually doing with all the chaotic, painful, self-inflicted mistakes we make along the way?
That's a great question.
Because it's one thing to have a physical ailment, it's another to ruin your own life with bad decisions. Romans chapter 8 uses two highly visual metaphors to explain how this gets resolved. The first is the master carpenter.
Yeah, building on Romans 8.28, the promise that all things work together for good. Imagine a master craftsman standing in a workshop. He takes a massive bag labeled all things, and into this bag goes the absolute worst raw materials imaginable.
Like terrible decisions, generational trauma, addictions, betrayals, deep misunderstandings, backslidden children, it all goes into the bag. Nothing is tossed out as unusable garbage.
And in a finite human system, those materials are ruinous. But the carpenter mixes the contents of this bag with the solvent of his own grace.
Okay, I love that imagery.
He sculpts these jagged, broken pieces into a unique masterpiece, specifically an image of his son. Think of the historical account of Joseph being sold into slavery by his own brothers.
A completely horrific, traumatic betrayal.
Right. And yet, decades later, that exact sequence of terrible events placed Joseph in the perfect position in Egypt to save his entire family from a deadly famine.
That's incredible.
The good wasn't visible in the pit. It wasn't visible in the prison. It was only visible in the final masterpiece. It requires an immense, almost unreasonable level of trust to believe the carpenter is actively shaping your current disaster into a victory.
So what does this all mean? Because dealing with the trauma of life is only half the battle. What about the crippling internal guilt of the mistakes you made yourself?
That's the real weight for a lot of people.
If you feel like a fraud, you can't step into the identity of a conqueror. That brings us to the second metaphor. The one-man courtroom. This is drawn from Romans 8.33 and 34, which deals directly with the accuser.
And that accuser can be the devil, it can be the judgment of society, or it can simply be the relentless condemnation of your own internal monologue. The voice that tells you that you are permanently disqualified because of your past.
To silence that specific voice, the framework envisions Jesus taking over the entire legal system. We talked about this in the opening hook. It's just brilliant.
It really is.
The trial starts with Jesus acting as the presiding judge. He sits silently behind the bench, listening to the prosecutor lay out all the very real, factual evidence of your mistakes.
The facts aren't denied. The mistakes definitely happened.
But then the judge steps down from the bench and becomes your defense attorney, the advocate. He pleads the blood, offering his own sacrifice as payment.
Amazing.
Then he walks over to the witness stand and becomes the star witness, testifying, this person is innocent, the debt is paid. Then he walks over to the jury box, sitting as the sole juror, and delivers the verdict, not guilty. And finally, he sits at the typewriter as the court reporter, permanently logging the record. Case dismissed.
The psychological impact of this legal exoneration is the engine of the entire theology.
Okay.
I mean, you cannot be a conqueror if you are paralyzed by guilt. Guilt keeps you looking backward, constantly defending your past.
Always on trial.
Yes. This absolute, airtight spiritual clearance frees the individual from that paralysis. You are no longer a defendant. You are free to move forward.
Okay, so you have this ultimate exoneration. The spiritual victory is secure in your DNA. But life still happens when you walk out of the courtroom, right?
Right.
How does a person actually live this out on a random Tuesday?
Right. The practical application.
The framework makes it clear that being a conqueror is not a passive state. It requires a highly specific, active mindset.
To illustrate this mindset, 2 Corinthians 2.14 pulls imagery directly from the ancient Roman triumphal procession.
Which is a fascinating yet completely brutal piece of history.
Absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
When a Roman general returned to the capital after a massively successful military campaign, The Senate would grant him a triumph. He would parade through the streets of Rome, displaying the spoils of war.
Huge
A
parade.
massive parade. And trailing behind his chariot would be the beaten, stripped, and humiliated rulers of the enemy armies, put on public display for the crowds to mock. The text argues that at the cross, Jesus executed a cosmic triumphal procession. He made a public spectacle of Satan and all demonic principalities in the spiritual realm.
So cosmic evil has already been publicly humiliated and defeated, but here is the massive paradox. Jesus defeated the ultimate spiritual enemy. Jesus defeated the ultimate spiritual enemy, yet this theology claims that the believer's biggest daily threat is not a demon at all.
No, not at all. The most profound threat to a conqueror is their own carnal flesh.
If the devil and demons didn't exist, this flesh is enough to conquer us. Let's define what the flesh actually means here, because it can sound like strange religious jargon. We aren't just talking about physical skin and bones.
Right. In this ancient worldview, the flesh, or being carnally minded, refers to the primal, self-preserving ego. It is the human instinct that demands comfort, revenge, pride, and immediate gratification.
Oh.
It's the bad attitude, the sudden burst of anger, the selfish ambition. That is the actual battleground.
Romans 8.6 draws a hard line here, saying you must actively choose to be spiritually minded rather than carnally minded. You have to execute a daily crucifixion of your own ego. The cosmic war is won, but the daily skirmish is against yourself.
This raises an important question, which is where human agency comes back into the picture. The victory is guaranteed by the spiritual DNA we discussed earlier, but the daily walk requires total humility.
You have to choose it.
Exactly. It requires a conscious submission to the spirit rather than your primal instincts. You have to set the trajectory of your mind every single morning.
And if you maintain that trajectory, the promise attached to it is just staggering. Romans 8.35 through 37 promises that absolutely nothing can separate a believer from God's love, not natural disasters, famine, or the sword, and not spiritual forces like demons or fallen angels.
It is a comprehensive security protocol. It covers the physical hazards of the tangible world and the invisible threats of the spiritual realm. Nothing external has the power to undo the victory that was established at the cross.
It really is a complete reframing of human reality. Let's trace the incredible arc of what we've unpacked today. We started by looking at how a crucified Messiah flipped the ancient script, trading physical dominance for a total spiritual conquest.
A huge paradigm shift.
Then we examined the raw human suffering of Jesus, which completely dismantled the idea that pain is just karma or punishment. We learned how our deepest weaknesses are not liabilities to be hidden, but the exact entry points for divine strength.
That point about the thorn in the flesh.
Right. And we watched the master carpenter take the darkest trauma and weave it into a masterpiece, while the ultimate one-man courtroom dismantled the psychological paralysis of our guilt. And finally, we saw that the true daily battle isn't against cosmic demons, but against the relentless pull of our own self-centered ego.
It's a brilliant, cohesive system of thought. It looks at the absolute worst aspects of the human experience: pain, weakness, crippling guilt, and the struggle against our own nature. And instead of offering an escape hatch, it repurposes those exact struggles as the raw mechanics of victory.
And I want to speak directly to you, the learner listening to this right now. I don't know what you're facing this week. Maybe it's a frustrating setback at work, or maybe you are navigating a devastating, life-altering trauma.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, this ancient framework offers a radically powerful lens. Your current struggle is not a sign of your defeat. It is the raw material the master carpenter is using right now to build your victory.
The obstacle is not an interruption to the plan. It is the very material of the plan.
So well said. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, and it's drawn from a subtle detail in the source material. The text mentions that after his grand victory, Jesus didn't just sit back, he gave gifts to the church.
Right, from Ephesians chapter 4.
Yes, but these weren't physical items. He gave people, apostles, prophets, pastors, and teachers to help perfect the saints. The implication is profound. Being a conqueror was never meant to be a solo mission.
That's such an important point.
In our highly individualized, hyper-independent modern world, we love the idea of the lone wolf overcoming all odds. But could it be that true conquest, the real overcoming of our deepest internal struggles, is actually impossible in isolation?
The Roman general we talked about earlier didn't march in his triumphal procession alone. He was surrounded by his fellow soldiers, sharing in the victory they achieved together.
So who is walking in your triumphal procession with you? Think back to the battlefield we started with. You aren't holding a physical sword, and your enemies probably look more like anxiety, addiction, or crippling self-doubt than an opposing army. But if this text is right, the war is already won. The DNA of a conqueror is already inside you. You just have to decide who you're marching alongside to see it through.